Well, this is the Lockheed C-130, or in Canada here, it's a CC-130 Hercules, and it's the model E. Today I'm going to show you how to navigate and work the navigational equipment on the Hercules. Normally I'm showing flight simmers the more realistic side of how to fly a lot of common bush planes used in Canada. However, I've got a lot of time on one of these Hercules doing search and rescue work. So I thought with these being available through Capt Sim on Microsoft Flight Simulator, I thought it was a good chance to show you how to work the what appears to be complicated controls in the Herc. So we're only going to be focusing in on navigation. Normally there is a crew minimum of 4 if you're flying VFR, or 5 IFR. So you'd have the aircraft commander, or the main pilot, the first officer in the right seat, flight engineer sitting behind and working all the engine controls, and if you're flying IFR, you have a navigator working the nav table is mandatory. Then there'll be a loadmaster in the back who's completely in charge of all the goings on in the back and loading and unloading. So it's going to be real time, real weather, and we'll get started here. So the plane is running in takeoff configuration, and we're sitting at Vancouver Airport on the west coast of Canada in British Columbia. We're sitting just north of the threshold of runway 08 right. So here I can show you the insides of the plane, the main controls. Now remember, it's not super realistic what I'm doing here. I'm doing the best I can, but to do it realistically, you've got another pilot, a flight engineer, and a navigator doing all of what only I'm here to do for you. So, but using the basic controls on the simulator without head tracking or without any fancy maps, just the default stuff available on the Microsoft 2020 Flight Simulator, we'll show you how you can get one of these from A to B. So there's the Loadmasters drop the ramp down so you can take a look inside. All the other doors open, controlled from this little clipboard. So we'll flip it back up and we'll get in the cockpit, and I'll show you where all the different flight officers sit and where they operate. The flight controls are really the same as any other aircraft. However, with 4 Allison T56 turboprop engines developing 4,300 horsepower each, the flight engineer's got his hands full working the engines and controlling fuel flow. So that won't happen during this simulation. We're just going to do the basics on navigation. And keep in mind, it's just me flying this thing. Normally, I've got a lot of help. So here's the basic controls. First officer sits there, navigator station in the back, right there. So if we're flying IFR, we have a navigator doing all the work that I'll be doing. So I'll have my hands full on the simulator. That's the flight engineer chair. And behind the pilot, right there is a staircase that goes down, turns left, and you're down into the cargo. There's the bunk. On a long trip, you can take a break, have a nap. That's the ceiling hatch. Now, the ceiling hatch is mainly you can crawl up there, flight engineer, and we can walk along the wing and sweep the wing off, sweep the snow off with a broom, access the engines to check a fault. And if it's in a combat zone, you can put a plastic dome up there when you're flying, so you can stick your head up and take a look around, which sounds pretty old-fashioned, but it's a good way to look and see if anybody's following you. So there'll be armor plating on the floor as well for combat zone to counteract ground fire. But other than that, there is no, on the CC-130, there is no no guns or bombs or rockets. This is strictly a utility cargo transport plane, and in my experiences it was used in search and rescue. And the nice thing about it in search and rescue is that you have all your SAR equipment on board, the SAR techs, which will jump out on the crash site with parachute. They have everything they need, and we'll have 2 big bubble SAR windows on either side where the spotters can sit and do their scan looking for visual clues that there is a wreck site. So anyway, today we're going to do a practical navigational flight from the city of Vancouver to the city of Victoria, British Columbia. It's a short flight, and normally I would fly to the west of it, pick up, in bad weather, pick up the ILS flying east, which is traveling at 089 degrees, and land at Victoria. But today I'm going to try and do the 5 different ways you can fly this plane. There's quite a few. And the markings on the controls aren't what you would normally find in a Garmin 1000 or a Cessna or something. So I'll explain it to you. So we're back looking around the cockpit. And it looks pretty complicated. So we're going to be using the default, oh, by the way, that's normal yoke, functions just like any other aircraft. But we're going to be using normal screen views, toggling through, so it might appear a little jumpy. For those that don't have a head tracker, we'll show you. So there's the throttle quadrant. The engine condition levers are full forward for normal operation. Like any other turboprop. And above is the engineer panel. So the flight engineer sits in between, slightly behind, and he can reach up and monitor the engines and control fuel flow. The instrument packages are pretty standard. We've got artificial horizon, the VOR head, radar altimeter, normal clock, airspeed indicator, vertical speed indicator right there, and the ADF, or that's the VOR head. The ADF is up, center, left. Now this knob is a mode selector, and the positions are heading, nav, TAC1, VOR1 ILS, and VOR2 ILS2. This will select the radio input for the navigational system, or if you're not using any radio input, this aircraft's equipped with gyro stabilizers, so that when you point the aircraft, take your hands off the controls, it will continue flying in gyro mode wherever you point it, and you can control it using hand wheels down between the 2 pilots, which I'll show you. So right now it's in heading. Now heading on this simulator roughly means the GPS, following a GPS track. So that's a little non-realistic. And I think Captain Sim has added that for simmers so that they can follow the predetermined GPS track. So the mode selector would be in heading when you're following a GPS track. There's another knob which I'll show you in a minute, but right up here is a normal and manual switch. And what that does is completely overrides any navigational input to the control of the aircraft. So if it's in normal, radio, VOR, tracking, GPS tracking, ILS tracking will all take place. But if you put it in manual, then it overrides all of that, and the bug right there, which is pointing north, let's move it up to, we're going to be taking off to the east. So let's move the heading bug so that we're taking off. So runway is 089, by the way, so that when it's in normal, it'll track the bug. The aircraft will turn towards the bug in gyro mode. There's, again, the engineer's panel. So we're not getting into that on this sim. It'll just, right, there's 5 people flying the plane. This lever, or sorry, this knob right here is on gyro pilot, so that in conjunction with the heading knob, or the mode selector in heading, will make the aircraft fly wherever you point it, and it'll stay stable. The other positions are to the left, blue left localizer. That's backtracking on a localizer or back localizer. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try and demonstrate all 5 different methods of flying. So the 5 are hand flying, backtrack on a localizer, flying towards the airport on a localizer, tracking a VOR, and GPS tracking. So that position right there is for a back course on a localizer. Gyro pilot, when you're flying in gyro mode, and if you're using radios, you go to the range lock. So that's VOR and GPS. And then finally, AFF is localizer position. Now the handy thing, and normally the way this works in conjunction with that toggle that goes from normal to manual, is that when you're transitioning from one radio mode of navigation to another, you can set the heading bug to where you want to go, flick it to manual, and then you can play around with the radios and reset them. And you'll see me doing that. Every time I change navigational mode, I'll use the manual heading bug to keep the aircraft flying in a certain heading while I reconfigure the radios. So what we normally would do from Vancouver to Victoria, like I said before, is fly west of the field, pick up the ILS heading 089 degrees towards Victoria. But today we're going to do it in a complicated fashion. I'm going to track GPS directly to Victoria, and then about halfway there, we'll pick up a VOR that's nearby and track it, so I can show you how to do that. It's slightly to the right. Then we'll get back on our GPS, and before we get to Victoria, I'm going to use the heading bug to gradually bring the plane around pointing west, and eventually we'll set up the back course. So we'll go back to the radios, do back course, do a 180 turn using a procedural turn, and that'll head us back east, right on track on the ILS to land runway 09 at Victoria. Now that's the flap lever. Right, this wheel, which is the same left and right for the different pilots, the one in the middle, these are what you'd use when you're in gyro mode to make the plane go up and down and left and right. And so it's handy, so you're not hand flying, it's a lot more stable. So that's those wheels. You roll it up. It works like elevator trim, but it isn't elevator trim. If you roll it up, then you'll pitch down. If you roll it back, you'll pitch up. And the gyros take over and the plane will fly in that particular attitude. If you use this knob up here, turn it to the left, you'll roll to the left. Turn it to the right, you roll to the right. And then you have to center the knob to level a plane out again. Again, working on gyros. Now in the older 130s, they used clutches that would grab onto the cables and make the autopilot do this. Newer ones use more like hydraulic servos and so on, but it's the same effect. This autopilot, and this is the altitude control. So the altitude control is good to hold altitude, so that's pretty standard on other aircraft. Engine throttles, engine condition levers. And the radios. Now left here and right are the pilot and first officer's ADF, or automatic direction finder. Center, top and bottom is the VHF radios for tuning into VORs and ILS. So number 1, and the one below it is number 2. So for the pilot we use the top one, number 1. These are lighting controls and oxygen controls available to the first officer, and lighting controls for the pilot. These are the basic flight controls instruments for the first officer, which is the same as the pilot, and the engine controls for the 4 engines in columns, 4 columns. So we've got the oil cooler, the oil quantity, oil pressure, temperature, fuel flow, turbine temperature, percent RPM, and the torque in inch pounds. Standard instrumentation for turbine turboprops. So we are pretty much ready to go. Let's get the map up so we can see what's going on here. So that's us, just north of the 08 threshold, 08 right. We're going to head off roughly to the east and turn south and pick up a GPS line that'll go directly from Vancouver down to Victoria on Vancouver Island, right there. And on the way, we will pick up the VOR station and practice changing from one nav style to another. So there's Victoria, YYJ. And there's Vancouver. So we plan to take off with the heading bug and gyros, and then we'll quickly hook up to the GPS and get us on track to Victoria. There's the VOR right there for YYJ that we'll use halfway to Victoria, and then we'll go back on the GPS track to Victoria. This is the non-directional beacon that's in line with the ILS for runway 09 of Victoria. So we'll tune in the ADF, and that's roughly the line of instrument approach. And we'll backtrack on it. It's not what I would normally do, but in order to demonstrate these different navigational modes, that's what I'm going to try and do. So we'll head out to the west, do a procedural turn, and turn around. I'll describe how I do the procedural turn when we get there. So I think we're just about ready to go. So we're going to look for traffic. I can see that we have an aircraft on approach for runway 08 right, so we'll have to wait for him. The aircraft flaps are set for about 50% takeoff mode. Engines are running. And again, we don't have a first officer or a flight engineer or a navigator. So you're going to see this really, the pilot doing a lot more work than normally would. So let's take a close look at our traffic. So that's us. Now we have plane landing. You'll see him in the screen in a minute. There he is. And then we have taxi traffic on our port side that we'll wait and let him go by too. And once he's clear, we'll taxi out. Now the C-130 prop wash from a bigger plane is an issue, but it's not as big a deal as if you were flying a little Cessna 150. And actually, I'll just pause this for a second. There was a time when we were maneuvering like this at an airport, and a couple of students in a little Cessna 150 didn't know any better, and they're trying to taxi in behind us in our prop wash. Well, that would have blown the plane right over and hurt them. So we stopped. The search and rescue technicians, the SARTECs, jumped out, literally grabbed the plane, stopped it from rolling, and the student pilots didn't know what was going on, but we saved them from flipping over. So that was pretty funny, but it all ended well. All right, so he's gone safely past, and we'll taxi out. As you can see on the map, we're going to do a left turn, then a right turn, and get to the numbers of 08 right. Now, once again, on this simulation, we don't have a flight plan. We're supposed to, like we normally have a flight plan. We're doing an instrument flight, so we're talking to air traffic control. We're right now talking to the ground controller. All of this is not showing up on the simulation. in order just to keep things simple so you can see how to fly this plane and how to navigate using this plane. So on our takeoff roll, we're going to rotate at about 120 knots. It all depends on the loading in the plane. It's a big factor. How much fuel, how much load. But today we're going to rotate at 120 knots. We're going to climb out at 140 knots. Once we're over 5,000 feet, it should be up to about 180 knots. But we're going to stay below 5,000. We're going to stay around 4,000 feet. So we'll hold short here, do our radio calls, make sure we have clearance to head out and take off on the runway. On land, normal cruise is about 290 knots. It varies. We may not be going that fast. Landing, oh yeah, we're waiting for clearance because we've got this fellow. We're going to let him take off first because we're not in a big rush. So on landing, you would be approaching at 140 and then over the threshold at no more than 120 knots. So we're going to roll out and get into position. So once again, we're going to take off on the heading bug and gyros. So no radio navigation, but soon after takeoff, when we have a good positive rate of climb, we'll do a right turn. I'll switch. You'll see I'll be on those two knobs. I'll be switching them to use the GPS navigation. So we're going to head out to the east, turn to the right, and pick up that purple GPS track line there. And the aircraft should take over. So we're on heading for gyro, and we're also set on gyro pilot. So we're ready to go. Heading bug is pointing straight ahead, 089, and that switch is in normal position, so that's good. So we can use the gyros. And brakes are on, throttle up, and release the brakes and start our roll. Now remember, you're steering with that little tiller steering wheel off to the left of the control yoke, whereas on the simulator you'll be using the rudder pedals. But on a real 130, the pilot is now steering using that little rotary tiller on with his left hand. The first officer is on the flight controls. Soon after takeoff, you switch roles and the pilot takes over. So we've rotated at 120 knots. We've got a positive rate of climb. We'll try and climb out at 140 eventually. Gear up, positive rate of climb, and we're at 50% flaps, so we'll start reducing the flaps as we climb. So let's change over to GPS and start our right turn. The plane should take over. So we're changing from gyro to nav. We go down to the other knob and change it to range localizer, which now introduces the radio's feed, but it really is coming from GPS, and that's kind of a quirk of this particular simulation. Real Hercs don't really work that way. So, as you can see, the plane is starting its right turn as we climb out. We're going to target 4,000 feet because the procedure turn to get onto the ILS's, the instrument approach chart shows 4,000 feet is where you would begin. So we might as well head to 4,000 feet and stay there. So as you can see on the map, the plane is starting to intercept the GPS line, and it's doing it all on its own here. So we're at 2,500 feet, still climbing. This line right here is the flight director line. So it'll show what the plane's about to do. If it goes to the right, it's about to bank to the right. So it gives you a quick indication that things are doing what they're supposed to do. So there's the NDB, and again I'm outlining over on the map the ILS path. straight over the MDB to Victoria. So where are we here? There we are. Okay, we're about to intercept the GPS track straight to Victoria Airport. And we're coming up to 4,000 feet, so I better quickly get down to the altitude hold and click it on. And it looks like we're overshooting the 4,000 feet. This is the simulation problem. Normally I just reach down with my hand and flick it while I'm watching the altimeter, so it's a little bit more accurate, but here I have to change screens, so it's a little laggy. But that's okay. 4,200 feet's okay. It's not very disciplined, but it'll do for now. We'll lower it down as we go. So we're about to intercept the GPS line. Once we get established back on the GPS line, I'm going to change over to track straight in on that VOR. And that'll be off to the right. So let's take a look at it here. So the VOR right there, called YYJ, has a frequency of 113.7. So because we're on GPS, I can go right to the radios and already tune in the VOR to that frequency, 113.7. So just to get it ready to go. It doesn't interfere with the current navigation because we're on GPS. It's not until I switch the mode knob to VOR1 will it take over. So there it is, 113.7. And we're still tracking the GPS line. So any time now, yeah, there we are. So pretty soon what I'll do is take that mode knob and switch it up to VOR1. That'll change the input to the navigational system from GPS to the VOR. Notice we're still on range lock. That doesn't change, but we can switch that right there to VOR1 and look at the flight director. It's going to the right, which is good because the VOR station is to the right. And we'll start tracking. Now I'm going to switch the CDI here so that we can fly straight in on the, what would that be, 195 radial? Yeah, so we can fly straight to the VOR. So the needle's centered. I've centered the needle using the knob, and then the plane will then follow that straight into the VOR. Now on the VOR, you can see this little arrow, meaning that the station is ahead of us. There's the distance in miles to the station and the course we're on. So you can see we're tracking off the GPS line, which is what we should be doing. We're heading straight for that VOR. Now, for demonstration purposes, let's go back onto the GPS line. It's very simple. All we have to do is, okay, I'm going to actually right now change it over to the ILS frequency, which is 108.7. Now we can do that because I've set it back to GPS. So we are now trying to intercept the GPS line. So now the radio is not working, so we can change the frequency. So this is, later on I'm going to be using 108.7 for tracking the ILS, both on the outbound and on inbound. So we're just about back on our GPS line. Now that NDB isn't tuned in, so let's do that. Oh, by the way, there's how I found the 108.7. So the NDB, called MB, is 293 frequency. So let's go to the radios and let's tune in my ADF to 293. And if we zip back to the ADF head, you can see the little needle, the thin white line, is pointing just off to the right at about 200 degrees. So that's where the NDB is. Now what I want to do, I don't want to go straight to Victoria because it'll be a tight turn to get onto the backtrack on the ILS, or the back course. And this big plane won't turn that sharp. So we're going to start getting off the GPS line to Victoria and start using the heading bug. So we're going to use the toggle switch to the manual position and fly the plane by changing the heading bug and start turning in segments towards the west to make it a long turn to get onto the back course. It's a little Cessna could do it a lot quicker, but the Herc, we're going to give it a lot of time to get on the back course. Because if you overshoot the back course, the plane will oscillate left and right forever until it establishes a lock. So here's the bug. Now I'm going to first aim for the NDB just for fun. So the NDB shows that it's up at about 200 degrees from us. So we'll head the bug to 200 degrees. And flick to manual. So now all the GPS, all the radios are disconnected and we're flying to the bug on gyros. So all of this time I'm not hand flying. The only time I've been hand flying this plane was on the rotation on takeoff and on landing. Everything else is done with the 4 navigational methods. Altitude hold is off. We're going to roll pitch down so I can get down to 4,000 feet, and then we'll put the altitude lock back on. Remember, when I do my procedural turn to get onto the ILS, I want to be at 4,000 feet. So let's see, that timing it, that should be about right. I can't see the altimeter. Well, that's pretty good. We'll go with that. Normally, like I said, you're staring at the altimeter with your right hand on the altitude hold switch. So now we're flying on the heading with no radio navigation, aiming roughly at the NDB, which is, see that, straight ahead of us, about 200 degrees to 205, 210, around there. But before we get to this NDB called Mike Bravo, we'll start turning towards the west in segments. So let's recap. I've already got the ILS tuned in to 108.7, so that's set. So let's go 240 degrees and cut the corner a bit. So the plane follows the bug. I'm going to switch that to back course. We're on the heading bug, so again, the radios are disconnected, so we can change all the radios to what we're going to use next. So I'm on back course. The mode selector isn't on VOR yet, but we'll do that. All right, so we are now, I've flicked on to normal, so we are now on radio navigation. The mode selector is pointing to the VOR1 ILS, so we are now, and the other knob is pointing to the back course, so we are now tracking the back course ILS. We're trying to lock on. And we're pretty close. So now we're flying outbound. So you can see we're on back course. I'm going to drop our altitude back down to 4,000. So we're off altitude hold. And we'll get it back down to 4,000. And then altitude hold back on. That's a bit better. There's some big hills out here, so we have to be at 4,000. Now this information is available on instrument approach plates. So it tells us that at about 15 miles out from the airport, we should start at 4,000 feet to intercept the ILS. Now what we're going to do pretty soon is, right there, I flicked on manual, and look at where the heading bug is. It's at 45 degrees off of where we were going. So this is called a 45 degree 180 turn. It's a procedural turn. So we're going to turn on to a heading that is 45 degrees off of where we were going. So 45 degrees to the left of west for 1 minute. So we're timing on the clock. Now this clock doesn't have a second hand. It's supposed to. So you can use your watch or something else to time it for 1 minute outbound on a 45-degree angle, which is about 205 degrees. Remember, the back course is heading this way, and we're heading off on a 45-degree angle. So after a minute, I'm going to turn the heading bug to the right and let the plane chase it to the right, because I want to do a rate 1 turn to the right. And if we flew outbound for a minute, it should bring us right back really close to being right on track on the ILS to land at Victoria. So let's see how well we make out. So pretty soon now, a minute will be up, and I'll change the heading bug. Now I'm timing this on my watch while I'm talking to you. So there, I'm moving the heading bug. That's been a minute. So I'm going to swing it around close to east, about as far as I can, just to get the plane turning. Once we get close to pointing east, I'll flick the switch from manual back onto the ILS position, and we'll start tracking. But if you do it too soon, you'll never lock on to the ILS. You'll just fly right past it. So I'll flick this over once we get close to it. So you can see here the line. And here's us. So we want to get around about there before I flick on the radio nav and take it off the heading mode. So we're coming around now. And again, this is all done by the plane. I'm not hand flying. Now, here's the glide slope is just above us, so we're in good lateral position. We're far enough away from the airport that we're under the glide slope, which is perfect, because we want to fly intercepting the glide slope vertically by coming in underneath of it. So this is just about right. It's perfect. We should intercept the slope as soon as we level out. Now look at this. We're already descending. So we've intercepted. We're on our glide slope. We're descending. We're still lining up with it. But that's pretty darn good. And as we level out, we should be pretty darn close. So it's still to the right of us, so we're still turning. Pretty soon you'll see this move in. And there's the flight director saying we're going to turn left. And we're intercepting the glide slope horizontally. We're already tracking the vertical glide slope. So this really left and right is a localizer, and up and down is the glide slope. So the localizer is centering, and that's pretty good. We're descending at about 500 feet a minute. So now you're going to pull back on the throttles to slow the plane down. You want to be approaching at maybe 140. So I've got a ways to go here. So you pull and power off and get your speed down. So that's good. So this is on normal. We have this on VOR localizer 1, and the other knob is on the ILS position to the far right, the AFF. Now in the distance, you can see through the clag the runway and the threshold, but that doesn't mean we'll see it all the way down there. You can't at nighttime, when it's getting dark here, you can't see cloud and stuff. It might obscure, so we're still tracking on the ILS and haven't gone to visual. Now pretty soon we're going to be doing station passage on the NDB. We'll fly right over it. So right now the needle is pointing straight to it, which is normal, and you'll see the spin around when we do station passage, and there it goes already. So that means we're right on track. In this particular airport, the NDB is right on the ILS. Okay. So the localizer centered, the glide slope centered. descending at 500 feet, airspeed's coming down. It's time to drop the landing gear. So we've got some flaps out, and we should just start to see the landing gear coming down. There we go. And yeah, we've got some cloud again, a little obscured. It's a good thing we're on instruments still. And we just let the plane fly itself down. Now, when we're approaching the threshold, depending on how far off the center line I am, I'm going to take over hand control. Sometimes you can leave it a little longer than others. But sometimes the ILS brings you, when you get close to it, you're a little off, so you have to take over and hand fly it in every case to get it down on the center line. I'm going to try and land short, so I'm going to land and maybe swing a bit of a farmer turn when I'm taxiing to the left, so I can make a tight turn to the right and get on the first taxiway. But we'll see. So airspeed's good at about 130. It's not bad. Still on the glide slope. Everything looks good. And pretty soon I'm going to take over. You can see we've got one white, one red, which is what you would expect if you're still on glide slope. That means you're at the right altitude. And I'll flick off the autopilot and start hand flying. So I'm going to, there we go. We're at full flap, airspeed's 120, power off, and land like any other plane. Keep it level, let it settle. And we're down. Now, like any turboprop, we have beta pitch, so you can put it into reverse pitch for a quick stop, and then on the brakes. And I'm going to come to a full stop before I do my turn. There we go. And off beta pitch. And we're going to do a right turn and get on a tight right turn and get on the first taxiway there, so we can clear the active as soon as we can. Air traffic control always appreciates it when we get out of the way in a hurry. Now I'm not going to take it into parking. We'll just clear the runway at the double line here. And again, I don't have a flight engineer, so I'm not going to go through the engine shutdown procedure. We'll just stop the video. So you have seen a bit of hand flying, not much. Flying on a heading with the heading bug, with gyros, flying on a GPS, flying on a localizer, flying back course localizer, and flying on a VOR with a C-130 Model E.